Okay, so for folks who haven't been with us, I didn't introduce myself either. I'm Nofa with Stops the Violence. And this series is called Saskatchewan Solutions. They're virtual sessions that focus on initiatives, tools, and resources that focus on building healthy relationships and strong, safe communities throughout the province. And so that's what brings Merle here. We'll be here. We have till 11, and they're 90 minutes, but we do end early sometimes. So we'll take the time and spaciousness that we have. Um, so Merle Massey is a farmer, an author, and a historian, and a rural mental health champion. She's a two-time Saskatchewan Book Award-winning author, a TEDx speaker, and serves as the executive director of the Do More Agricultural Foundation, championing mental health in Canadian agricultural. Merle will speak to the Do More Foundation's mission to cultivate a culture of mental well-being within Canadian farming communities. The Do More Foundation's work addresses head-on some of the community level stigma against mental illness, which we all know sadly it permeates many communities, including farming communities in Saskatchewan. So really grateful to have you, Merle, and your passion and energy, and I'll pass the time over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm laughing because something happened with the background on my screen. So where usually it says "Do More," really, really bright and bold, there's nothing. It just says the Agriculture Foundation. But I'll tell you guys a little bit about where the idea behind Do More came from. And Nofa, thank you so much for the lovely introduction and for inviting me to be with you all today. This is lovely to see so many of us here who share a lot of the same values and experiences. So thank you. So yes, I am Merle Massey. I am the executive director. I'm Saskatchewan born and raised. This is a picture from one of our farm quarters. Um, so my husband and I farm in West Central Saskatchewan. This is a rock wall that was created. The farmer who owned this, all the farmers in our particular area, what they would regularly do in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s is that they would hire First Nations to come down from Red Pheasant and other areas around North Battleford, and they would come down and they would pick stones. And when you pick stones, you actually have to pick them and sort of to show what you've picked. We have beautiful rock walls across so many of our farms. Some of them actually are so beautiful and tight, they kind of look like foundations for houses. And the reason why they would do that is because you get paid by the cord, and the cord is a physical measure, 4 feet by 4 feet by 8 feet long. And so there are a number of farms all across West Central Saskatchewan that have these sort of rock walls. Some are more famous than others, but that's often where they come from. Of course, as a farmer, I watch the clouds. I'm always paying attention to what's happening. I'm a gardener, I'm a paddler, a baker, and I'm a human mom and a pet mom as well. Um, this is a picture of our farm, Massey Panoramic Farm, an aerial photograph that I took, and we farm with my husband and I farm with his two brothers and his parents. So across the four farms, we crop about 5,800 acres of cereals, oilseeds, and pulses. And the boys also run a small herdle of beef cattle. And which is great because that means that I have great food security because I have beef cattle, dead cows in my freezer. So kind of love that. And we're not quite finished seeding, but we're getting closer. We've got about 1,000 acres left to go. So another 3-4 days and we should be done. All right, Massey Panoramic Farm, the Do More Agriculture Foundation, the national voice and champion for mental health in Canadian agriculture. It is our mission to cultivate a culture of mental well-being within Canadian farming communities. This is where Do More started. So Kim Keller, who's a Saskatchewan farmer, had yet another suicide. Farm stress is real. Suicide is real. And so she posted on, at the time, Twitter, and Ag, we've got to do more. And this is where the idea for the Do More Agriculture Foundation came through. She worked with a group of colleagues who were adjacent to agriculture and fellow farmers, and they created the Do More Agriculture Foundation in 2017. It became a national level charity in 2019. And so this is how we work. These are our three pillars. One is action, action for awareness, education, and breaking stigma. And we do that as much as possible right at the community level. And I'll break that down a little bit in a minute. Our focus is on community. That community connection for strength and support, belonging, and hope is absolutely critical to what we do here at the Do More Agriculture Foundation. And our third pillar is resources, connecting those who need resources with those who provide them. We say that sort of in a general way. There are a number of entities across Canada who have erupted in the last 5 years, and I'm so delighted to see this because we all need to be working in this area. There's so much work to be done. An example here in Saskatchewan is Sask Ag Matters. They're a partner with Do More. We work very closely with them and support them. Sask Ag Matters actually connects therapists who understand farming with farmers, and they have a pot of funding to kind of cover those costs. So that's another group that I would recommend working with. One of the reasons, that Do More Ag exists and why we work so hard is that we know that stigma still exists, and it's particularly noticeable in rural communities. And how we define stigma is simply disgrace that's invisible and powerful and unseen. So the stigma about mental illness remains really strong. We know that awareness has grown, and in the last 10 years or so, everyone kind of, says this on a regular basis that we know that there is increased awareness around mental health and mental illness. But one of the reasons why it still matters and why we still see it is that there's quite a gap between awareness and action. And so moving that dial on action is one of the reasons why we exist. The known effect of that stigma and the reason why it matters so much is that it stops people from seeking help, even when they think they might need it. The thought is, if others know that I'm getting help for my mental illness, then they will treat me differently. Our relationship will change, or my position in the community will change, and not change for the better, change for the worse. People will feel ostracized. They can feel shunned. There's no anonymity in a small rural community, and so that's part of that driving force. That sense of stigma, we see it in action in lots of different ways. And for anyone who lives in a rural community, I'm just going to throw out a couple of examples. Let's say that there are two 18-year-old people, and both are in the hospital for 6 weeks. One is in the hospital because they had a car accident. The amount of support, flowers, casseroles, GoFundMes, dances, these sorts of things that happen in a rural community are very high. People are off the charts there to help. And the other 18-year-old is also in the hospital for 6 weeks, and they're in the hospital for a mental health crisis. Oh, they need space. That's stigma in action. When we treat people differently depending on how and why they need help and how and what kind of healthcare support they're looking at or that they require, that's stigma in action. And it is still a known and noticeable activity in rural communities. So I'm hopeful that my current snapshot works. These stats are from 2021. We are working with the University of Guelph. They'll be releasing a new survey in 2025, in January 2026. And so we'll get a more recent update. These statistics are quite scary, but 35% of farmers, the Do More Agriculture Foundation focuses primarily on farmers, but also in rural communities because that's where farmers live. 35% of farmers meet the classification for depression. 57% of farmers meet the classification for anxiety. Again, these statistics are from 2021, but that's still fairly recent. and it's still quite scary. We know that 1 in 5 people across their lifetime will actually be diagnosed with needing support for a mental health crisis, but we know that a lot of people experience mental health crises that are not diagnosed. So, in my opinion, that 25% statistic is still slightly low, and it has no bearing on the fact that it has a huge impact on people. Access, of course. Rural communities generally have limited local access to mental health resources, and this contributes to all kinds of ongoing and domino effects. Other pieces in that current snapshot: 40% of producers, agricultural producers, feel uneasy asking for help. That's twice as high as the national average. We know that 1 in 5 people across the board feel uneasy asking for help. That's twice as high, 40% in rural communities. 1 in 4 farmers have felt their life was not worth living, wish they were dead, or thought about taking their own life in the past 12 months. I actually sat down and made a bit of a list of all the people I've lived in Bigger, which is a community of about 2,600 people plus our rural area. And I've lived here about 20 years. And, there are 10 people on that list of people that I knew, that I had met, that I had known, or that my husband and I were related to, who've died by suicide in the 20 years since I've lived in this rural community. We know that rural suicide is higher. It's a 20 to 30% higher rate of suicide for farmers than any other occupation in Canada. And in addition to that, rural suicide rates are higher than urban suicide rates. This matters. The culture and everything that's happening in rural communities matters. And part of that reason why it's higher is that we're 4 times more likely to use a firearm to die by suicide than the general population. And these are really, really scary statistics. And I apologize for kind of throwing those at you, but sometimes setting the stage as to why Do More Agriculture exists and the work that we have set ourselves to do kind of allows everyone to kind of recognize that there's a reason why we're here. So mental health is a journey. It's not a destination. And I want to remind everyone of this. And again, apologies. Not all my slides have worked out. I did a quick fix on the slides. We're just going to keep rolling with them. And Nofa, I can share a clear version of the slides at a later point. But people will have different pressures and events across their whole life that can lead to mental injury. So things like grief, stress, PTSD, sometimes a physical change like Alzheimer's, or if you've had a major, you've been in a car accident, these sorts of things. There's there's a lot of really good research that shows that mental health and physical health are completely intertwined, and most of us know this. However, when we set up a foundation such as the Do More Agriculture Foundation, sometimes people assume that mental health is something that's separate, that mental health and physical health are different. And they are and they aren't, right? They're very, very intertwined. There are lots of physical reasons why you could end up with a mental health injury or illness or adversity. If you have a mental health injury or illness or adversity, you will often feel it in your body. You will feel it in your body. It'll come out in your body. There'll be things like high blood pressure, loneliness, actually, which is simply a feeling that you have in your body. It can actually manifest in all kinds of physical things that can hurt your health. So one of the things that I kind of like to talk about is that there's also a difference between how you're feeling in one moment and how you're feeling 5 years down the road. So some people have this binary idea that mental health is either you're healthy or you're not, right? Either you're healthy or you need to call a call line, right? Or go to a therapist. And it's like there's this whole area in between that people can do to kind of help their mental health. And that's why I like to focus on it's a journey and not a destination. So the Do More Agriculture Foundation works at the community level, and the community aspect of what we do is probably the most important thing. We aim to help strengthen a community's capacity to understand, to welcome, and include good ways to support all community members to respond to injury, illness, and adversity related to their emotional and their mental health. We know that that social context matters, that rural context and that social context. And it's important. So, one of the other things, and I'm sure that you've all seen this as well, but when you see social media, oftentimes you will see if the subject comes up and it's mental health, what they'll um, how it will be framed and phrased is it's an individual journey, right? That you need to eat better, you need to sleep better, you need to do yoga, you need to walk more, you need to call the call line, you need to go to therapy. It gets reduced to that clinical and individual and personal responsibility. What Do More Agriculture believes very strongly is that there is a level of collective community responsibility when we believe that when people understand emotional and mental adversity in that collective sense, not necessarily, yes, individual experience, and that there is a community level of responsibility. That's the only way that we're going to work on and fight the stigma that we know still exists and give people that better sense of connection and shared experience. One of the things that ag communities have going for them is that there is a shared understanding of these risks. It's interesting though, one of the things that agriculture people will do is that when we understand these shared risks, we still tend to revert back to that individual level of responsibility. But there are high risks in agriculture just from being a farmer and running an agricultural business or even a business that supports agriculture. There's all that things like, and I won't list these all, but some of the things that we know exist in rural communities are that long hours, the shift work, the lack of advancement. You can work for a farm that on the outside looks very, very healthy and looks like it's operating well, but those margins are so thin that you may not have a lot of opportunity for advancement, to go and learn more things, to take more classes, to go to university, to sort of expand yourself and grow yourself. It isn't the same as when you work for, say, a big, credit union or a bank or a larger thing that actually puts a bit of focus on that personal development. Things like lack of rural services, that's a big thing. We're all very well aware of that. Access to the help and supports that are required are just not as robust in rural areas. And of course, when you work in agriculture, your risks for illness and injury are higher, much higher than any other occupation. Of course, these are the ones that you hear most commonly, the factors beyond control. Farmers really, really like to stress all of these factors, weather, costs, prices, labor. Farmers get more angry about international trade issues than probably anybody else that I know. Agriculture and food policies. Farmers also get really, really hot around the collar around food policies. I'm sure you've noticed. Disease, pests. If any of you have paid attention, of course, avian influenza has hit a lot of farms across Canada. The poultry industry and the egg industry are reeling. It's why the cost of eggs has gone up so high. It's because of avian influenza. And so there are farms that have had to kill all the animals under their care, and that is a huge, huge blow to any farmer. Those of us in Saskatchewan will remember the BSE crisis of about 15 years ago that hit the beef industry really, really hard. And there were farms that had to kill their entire herd. And that sets you back financially, but it also really hurts you as a farming individual. And so these are examples. And I know that you can think of others as well. This is one of my slides that did not translate particularly well, but the social dynamics. There are huge social dynamics in rural spaces. We know that there are higher addiction rates to both drugs and alcohol in rural spaces, particularly alcohol. It's very, very common to visit a farm and be offered a beer at 10 o'clock in the morning. It's not an uncommon thing. We know that there are higher gender-based violence in rural spaces. We know that there's intergenerational trauma and embedded cultures within families. And it's one of the reasons why those farm transition issues, when you're transitioning a farm from people who've operated it and into the next and even down into the third or fourth generation, those can be fraught. They can break farms apart. They can be really, really difficult conversations. There are people across Canada who are experts who help farmers, help farm families to go through those transitions, and there's a lot of problems. Um, there's a lot of We think about farms as being spaces of richness, but they're also spaces of a lot of debt, right? So actively choosing to go into farming means accepting high levels of debt, and there that's a problem as well, right? So there's nothing can get people more upset. It's the same reasons why people divorce, right? Like finances and getting along and social dynamics and family dynamics. These all are sort of exacerbated within a farming situation. And so these are some of the realities. What's interesting is that even though there's a high level of understanding that the problems are shared and that these problems are not specific to an individual farm, that they're shared across all farms, there's still this sense that if a farm hits a financial crisis and potentially could go under, or if there's things about the farm, let's say that there's a divorce and the farm has to be broken up and sold as a part of that, it's people still see it as an individual level. It's I failed. I was the farmer and I failed. And they internalize that in very interesting ways. And it becomes a very individualized problem, which is really fascinating because the issues are quite shared. Those financial risks, tariffs, pests, disease, all of those things. Multiple farms face all of these sorts of things, including things like family dynamics. Um, another another th- so that's those external pressures. When these external pressures and internal pressures from how people operate their farm and how their internal farm and family dynamics are, it can be that people will develop a mental injury or an illness, such as stress, anxiety, or depression. And when we end up treating it like an individual problem, people can feel like it's a personal failure. And in farming, it comes out as they're not strong enough to be a farmer. They're not strong enough to hack the stress levels. And it's fascinating because those stress levels, and it's very sad, it's fascinating and sad because if we recognize that the problem is shared, then we'll have a better understanding that the solution can also be shared. When we face similar challenges, if we learn how to face them together and learn that these are not individual level or farm level challenges, but that all of us share them, then we can unleash that help and we can unleash that support beyond the individual level at the community level because both are needed. You cannot get better alone. The more supportive your community is, and the more people you have around you who understand and support the adversity or the crisis that you are currently facing, the sooner you will recover, or the sooner someone will be willing to reach out for help. And then again, the sooner they'll recover. So, having set the stage and kind of given you that really broad scale overview of the challenges that Do More Egg was created to think about, I want to shift gears a little bit and tell you a little bit about a few of the programs that Do More Egg has developed. And then the last section of what I'm going to be talking about today is to provide each of us, including myself, with some action items and some ideas of things that we can do and the way that Do More Egg thinks about what it looks like to be a community champion to help one another. So the first is our largest program is what we call our community fund, and we champion mental health workshops in communities across Canada. And so we open these applications in the spring every year, and communities across Canada can apply to us for funding to host mental health literacy events. And we offer at this time 4 different workshops: our own Talk, Ask, Listen, which is a workshop really focused on what communities can do to help one another and to become better space, to become really robust spaces for mental health. So that's one. In the Know, which is a program that came out of the University of Guelph. That one is also geared for farmers, and it centers more on mental health literacy. So getting oftentimes in rural communities, I'll be 54 this year, and I'm under the average age of Canadian farmers. The average age of Canadian farmers is 57. And what I know is that people my age and up, we didn't receive a lot of training. Nobody talked about mental health when we were going through school, even like high school, elementary school, even university. This was something that you only studied if you happened to take a psychology class. This was not something, and it was certainly never talked about at the community level. I grew up in the era where if someone died by suicide, it was very likely that they were buried outside the cemetery. So when we talk about that culture of community bias and that culture of community stigma, these are some of those inherent and long held beliefs that we kind of work against. And so creating spaces within communities to help communities to increase their level of mental health literacy is a very welcome thing. And so we help with that. A third program that communities can apply to us for funding and host is called Safe Talk. And that specifically is to help communities to develop the vocabulary and the understanding to talk about suicide. And the fourth program is that communities can apply to us to host mental health first aid. Those are, of course, of the four programs, those are the most expensive and focused, and they require a lot of commitment by the people who sign up, because it's 8 hours plus some additional, about close to 4 hours of prior learning before the all-day event. And nonetheless, we've been running these workshops in communities since about 2020 and 2019, 2020, and our community program has grown year over year. And this community support for mental health, this comes from one of our community champions. And they said it feels like we've taken a big step forward in breaking the stigma in our community. So when I think about these community workshops, what I see is that communities are deliberately creating space for the conversation. And that's something that Stops to Violence is doing as well. You're asking me in to create space for the conversation about mental health and mental illness and what that looks like in rural spaces. You are recognizing that it matters, that it's universal, that the impacts are very clear, and that we absolutely can do more. And so when we host these community level events, and when I should say also, when we define community, we don't just define that by geography. We don't just say, are you Arcola, Saskatchewan, or Bengoff, or High Prairie in Alberta, or wherever. We also define community in terms of it might be a community-based group. So the Battle River Research Group, for example, I'm going into Alberta in a couple of weeks to host a community workshop for them. We've had faith-based groups. So churches come to us when they're based in a rural community, and they become the community champion to kind of create this space. And so we think about community beyond just geography. So just wanted to make that clear. Sometimes they are a provincial level producer-focused organizations such as Alberta Ag or Sask Ag or BC Poultry Association. It could be all kinds of different ways to define community. So that's our largest program is our community fund, where communities can apply to us to host these workshops. Another program that we run is called Ag Talk, and this was specifically developed. It is an online what it does is that it provides access to a program called Together All. If you haven't heard about Together All is an online space where people who are facing mental health adversity can go just so that they can talk anonymously and safely in a curated, clinically moderated space about what they're facing, how they're doing, how they're feeling that day. One of the things that I know that is happening when it comes to talking about mental health is that binary that I mentioned, right? That people are either healthy or they need therapy or they need to call a call line. And what we know is that there's this whole area in between that maybe somebody is accessing therapy, but in between therapeutic appointments, maybe they would just like to talk about these sorts of things. And since we also know that people are wary of talking about mental health in rural communities because of they're worried about how people will react to them and how people might change how they think about them. We've partnered with Together All to allow Canadian people attached to Canadian agriculture to access this online space, Together All, to have those conversations with one another. It becomes a way to just sort of blow off steam, maybe gather some ideas of what other people have done to work on their mental health. So that's something that we work with BASF, RBC, and the McCain Foundation to bring to people connected with agriculture right across Canada. We also host a number of workshops, and I have this one up specifically because it's next Thursday, June 5th, how to talk about suicide. So we've partnered with the Centre for Suicide Prevention, which is part of the Canadian Mental Health Association of Alberta, to present this hour and a half long. So it's a Canada-wide, instead of community specific, this one's online and it's Canada-wide, and anyone is welcome to come and listen in. So it's sort of a shortened version of Safe Talk, just to give people some particular tools about how to talk about suicide. I mentioned that as I was growing up, in the 1970s, if someone died by suicide, it was very likely that they were buried outside the cemetery. So that's something that actually was a thing. You'll also know the word commit suicide. It's because suicide was considered murder and it was part of the criminal code. And so you just, as we say, commit a crime, we'll say commit suicide. And that's sort of a carryover. Again, how we talk about suicide does matter. And so that's something to think about. Our words actually do matter. So anyone here on this call, you're welcome to join us and sign up for this event. And the sign up is on our website. Other programs that we run, again, at that national level. So Field of Mind is supporting men's mental well-being. We've had one guest so far. We're going to host 4 across this year. We had one guest so far in late April, is Jerry Friesen, who wrote a book called The Recovering Farmer. And he was very open and honest about his journey with anxiety and depression. And Jerry has had a huge impact in writing this book and shaping space for other farmers to come forward to him. And Jerry says that one of the things about what he's done is that it's not because what he's done is unique or the trouble that he's faced is unique. It's because it's not unique. It's very universal. Many, many other farmers have also walked with anxiety and suicide and did not feel comfortable talking about it. And people have come up to Jerry and shared how important and how much impact his work has had. So that's an example of the speakers that we tend to have for our Field of Mind. We have another one coming up in June. It's Seth McVitie, who's going to be talking about the Men's Buddy Up campaign, to be a buddy for one another around suicide. Another program that we run is Ag Culture. Ag Culture is an agriculture literacy program for mental health professionals. So anyone who is a mental health professional and would like to deepen their understanding of the issues and particular context of mental health, particular to farmers, you can take our ag culture program. It's funded by FCC, so it is free for therapists right across Canada. We host one a month, and the next one is coming up, I think June 13th. I forget the date exactly, but it is coming up, and you're well, and all the further dates are all listed on our event website as well. So we also know that therapists tend to book, months and months out. So please feel free, if there are particular therapists who are interested in taking our ag culture program, happy to have you. So please consider that. This is just a picture of me standing on stage, simply because this is something else that we do quite a lot of. We do a lot of public speaking on stage as well as online. So this with Stops to Violence is an example where we help entities shape space for the conversation around mental health, particularly in agriculture and rural spaces, because that's our mandate. So we do get invited to a lot of ag shows. We get invited to a lot of AGMs. We get invited to a lot of events where we are invited right up on stage to talk about mental health. And it's always best if if we're right on the main stage and not in a breakout room, because that's something else that we notice. People will self-select out when they see the words mental health or mental illness. They're like, no, I'm fine. I don't need that. And they just self-select out. So we prefer to be on the main stage. Now, there are other things, of course. We have a lot of resources that we share. We work with partners right across Canada. And I just wanted to give you just a bit of a sampling of some of the things that we do at the Do More Agriculture Foundation to insert and support communities to shape space for the conversation around mental health. Now I'm going to shift again, and I want to talk about, dig in a little bit more of what it looks like to support a community. Um, what does it look like for a community? What does a caring community look like? How can we make our communities a caring community for people experiencing mental health adversity? Um, And going back to that story that I told of the two different 18-year-olds, both in the hospital for 6 weeks, and how a community treats those two families entirely differently. It doesn't matter if it's an 18-year-old, they could be 60 and in the hospital for, one for a heart attack and one for a mental health crisis. And still, rural communities tend to treat those two examples entirely differently. And so that's an example of things we know that that rural communities have built in a lot of caring in particular ways and for particular reasons. So things like taking casseroles, taking I know that in my rural community, if somebody comes home with a brand new baby, the first 2 weeks they don't make any suppers. We actually have a roster, whereas like I can take Thursday, I can take next Tuesday, right? And we show up with, everything that you need to do your supper. So we know that there are community strengths. If a church group is helping to put on the lunch for a funeral, there's call trees, right? So you're bringing coffee and you're bringing tea and you're bringing dainties and you're bringing sandwiches, these sorts of things. We know that those sorts of um, community level supports exist. And so how can we activate those in different ways to think about mental health and to activate community supports? So that's part of what we've been working on. And again, apologies for the background, but those who walk with a diagnosed mental illness describe community as a place where they can get help and get support. So when you think about it from your own community strengths, do you have a library? Do you have a space where you can create maybe a drop-in space for those who are caregivers for people in your community to get together? How can you rally people in your community to support those with a mental injury or illness in the same way that you rally people who have a physical illness? So these are some of the things that we look at. And one of the ways that I like to ask communities is, how do you describe your community? Because if you describe your community as helpful and supportive, or you describe your community as a good place to live, what does that look like? What does that mean to you? And kind of think through what that is. And so I asked them to think about community strengths. What are your existing strengths? How do you normally organize yourself, and how can you leverage that in new ways? So if you have a library, do you have a bookshelf, like a one shelf that's dedicated to mental health? And can you raise $500 or $1,000 so that the library can buy some of the most recent, really up-to-date things that maybe can help people for their own mental health? Do you have community spaces for meetings or connections or supports? And maybe you can set up more support groups. Have you done a roster of what therapists happen to live in your local community? Who offers the kind of supports that maybe could be helpful? Do you host community events that have a mental health theme? Do you specifically ask for workshops? Do you bring in speakers? Do you bring in music? Do you bring in theater that has a mental health theme? Do you have that willingness to support each other? Like phone trees and casserole prep and fundraising and going onto the farm and helping with harvest, going and cutting their grass. Like, do you have those sorts of things that people are willing to do? Excellent. Can you activate that for people who also have a mental health adversity? And local communities, of course, have a lot to say around what their local health supports are. I live in Biggers, 2,600 people. We still have our rural hospital. We've got a rural hospital auxiliary, and we've got the Rural Hospital Foundation, and they do a lot of work to recruit doctors, to identify what we need in our rural community. If you've got groups like that, well, what can they do to maybe recruit a therapist to start coming to your community once or twice a month, right? Like to, these sorts of things. Do you have a public health nurse? Have you made sure that your local doctors and nurses have had a lot of training so that they can help someone who happens to walk in the door and they're having a mental health crisis? Because we should never assume that just because someone works in the health industry, that they don't also have a really high level of stigma against mental health. Because I can tell you that those have been measured, and there is, even if someone is a doctor or a nurse or a technician, they may have a high level of stigma about mental health. So what have you done to help and support them to receive some training? So there's all kinds of things that a community can do to make space for the conversation, including hosting things like our own workshops or other workshops, these sorts of ideas. So that's thinking through at the community level. I want to leave you with what I've learned how to do to help the people around me. So, can we talk? How can we do more? And I don't want to tell you what to do. I don't do that. My mother used to call that shoulding on people. It's just like shitting, but shoulding. Anyway, shoulding on people. That's how my mom used to frame that. I will tell you what I've had to learn how to do to be a caregiver, to help and support those around me. And I do support immediate family members who have diagnosed and very serious illnesses. I grew up on a farm. My father had bipolar disorder. We didn't have words in the 1970s. We had no idea what that was. My brother David also had bipolar disorder, and we lost him to suicide. So these are things, again, these are my hard lessons that I'm happy to share with you, of things that I've learned how to do that have been helpful. The first is to talk, simply to talk about mental health and mental illness. We need to make sure that these conversations are welcome, that they're shared, and that they're happening. When I host workshops, I hear this story all the time. Sooner or later, someone in a workshop will say, in my family, no one ever talked about mental health. Then one day, we started talking about it. And all of a sudden, all these stories started to come up about people in my family and things that had happened that I had never heard about. And once we started talking, there were so many stories. I have heard variations of that in almost every workshop I have ever led around mental health and mental illness. So I know that the first thing that we need to do is to be clear and open and talk about mental health. The next thing that I do is that I ask what do I need to know, and what do I need to know right now? And for me it comes out in two directions. What do I need to know in this moment, and what do I need to know kind of in general? And I want to break that down for you. Really, it's about activating my own curiosity. And I've learned to do it in a couple of ways. So if there's someone around me that I can tell or I think is off kilter, and I suspect that they've got a bit of crisis, or it's at least some adversity going on, and I can feel that they're just off. Um, what I can do is give them my interest and my attention, and I start to ask. And don't be afraid to ask, how are you doing really? Please tell me more. And activating your curiosity, open curiosity. Please don't go immediately, if at least I had to learn this, is not to go, how can I help you solve this? Oh, you need to do yoga. Oh, you need to go for a walk, but just creating that space for them to crack open and share is one of the best gifts that you can give. And the second gift that I've learned to do is that if I know that someone around me does have a particular mental injury, and some of the ones that matter to me is schizoaffective disorder. So that's one that I've had to do some, because it's a bit of an odd one. And so I had to do some extra research work on that. When my brother was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and then my father, I did a lot of research and learning around bipolar disorder. So that, and what I did is that it's the gift of my curiosity. And what it does is when I dig in and read more about that particular illness, I had a friend who has bulimia. And so I've done some extra work so that I made sure that I understood as much as I could about bulimia, because what it's done is that it's shortened the distance between my friend and myself, or my family member and myself. They don't need to spend any time teaching me about their illness, because I've done my part of the bargain. I've done my work to learn a little bit. So when you activate your curiosity and you spend your time to understand a bit more and learn a bit more, that is a huge gift. It's a gift to them, and it's a gift to yourself. So that's something that I've learned how to do, and I'm sharing that it has made a huge, huge difference. There's a caveat to that though, and that's what I've had to park um, what I thought I knew about these particular illnesses, and actually dig in and learn properly. Because what I learn on social media, or what I think an illness is, let's say schizophrenia or OCD, those are two common ones that, oh, she's so schizophrenic, right? Just means she changed her mind, right? Like, but like, that's not what schizophrenia is. But people use that, or it's like, oh, I'm so OCD, I have to have, things, clean, or, organized in a particular way. Well, that's not what OCD actually is, right? And so we have this sort of internal socialized assumption about what some of these things are. So what I've had to learn how to do is every time my these like thoughts or assumptions, things that I think I know about that particular mental illness, I kind of let them bubble up. And then I look at it, it's like, okay, yeah, that's a thought. I'm just going to park that over there. And the, they're ingrained in all of us. These are not, I don't frame them as bad things. They're just part of the culture that we grew up in. Anybody who read Sybil, that was about multiple personalities. And some people think that that's what schizophrenia is. Also not. It's a slight variation, right? But if you hear about um, on the news something really terrible happening, somebody driving a vehicle through an event, that's something that's more and more common, or a shooting, like a mass shooting, the first thing that the media wants to know is, did they have a mental illness? Right? Because somehow it's like, oh, mental illness means they're bad people, right? Like, so we've developed this shorthand. And again, that doesn't make it true. A person with mental illness is actually less likely. They're more likely to be on the receiving end of violence than on the giving end of violence, right? So we need to park what we think we know, and actively park it, so that we can engage our curiosity and ask good questions and actually actively learn. The last thing that I've learned how to do is listen. And for me, this is the hardest one, because if you're anything like me, you're hardwired to listen so you can fix it. And again, this is what my mom would call shooting on people, right? And for me, this is a skill that I continue to learn. Listening is a massive gift. It's very, very active. Listening is you're paying attention and you're focusing. You're bringing yourself to the conversation, but you're shaping that space for them to talk. You're shining a light on the subject. Jerry Friesen, in his book, The Recovering Farmer, talked about the moment when he had, I think it was a feed supplier, somebody who came to his farm, or maybe it was a neighbor. I think it was a neighbor who just showed up at his farm, could tell that Jerry was really, really off, and just shaped the space for Jerry to talk. And all that friend did was just listen. He didn't listen to try and solve. He didn't listen to say, "Oh, Jerry, you need to do X, Y, and Z," or "Did you think about this?" or "Did you try that?" Right? If mental illness was easy to fix, none of us would be having a problem, right? If this was easy, we'd have all solved this a long time ago. So if you hold yourself back and just listen and actively listen, that sounds hard. Tell me more. How did that make you feel? How are things going today? being that space to actively listen is a massive gift because what you're doing is that you're shining a light on that person and you're shining a light on the subject. This is the way that I think about shining that light. That attention, that willingness to listen is shining a light. And for me, there are three different kinds of lights. The porch light is what you'll hear about probably the most often. If you're on social media, if you're on Facebook or Twitter and Instagram, you're going to see a post that says, "My door is always open, the coffee's always on. If you need me, I'm home. Please come and talk to me." And that's what I frame as the porch light. And the porch lights are fantastic and we need them. What it signals to people is that people can talk to you about mental health, that you welcome the conversation, that you will listen with that curiosity and compassion, that you welcome them to come to you. And that's actually also the downside of the porch light, because the more ill someone is, the less likely they're going to be in a position to reach out to you. And so the porch light is helpful if somebody still has enough strength to come to you. It's also helpful at the community level because it starts to change that conversation at the community level and lets people know that, in my house, this is an okay conversation. This is a welcome conversation. And so that is important. The second way that I think about shining a light is the flashlight. And what that shows is that you're confident enough to go out and check on someone, find someone, recognize that someone's not doing well and go to them, that you're willing to go and find them, that you'll take your flashlight, you'll take your energy and find them where they are and sit with them until they're ready to go and move to wherever they need to go next, and that you will walk alongside them to help them find their way. I always think about this in terms of the porch light and the flashlight in that rural context, right? If you're driving down a rural road, you're going to see their porch lights, right? You're going to see their yard light and their yard light is on. But if you're really, really ill, you could be walking down that road and you're stuck and you don't have the energy to like go into their yard. But if they're out there with a flashlight and they recognize that you're out there, they're going to come to you, with the flashlight. And then together you shine that light and to help them find their way. And by the way, that's not directing them to where you think they need to go. That's shining the light for them where their next step or their next that they've defined. Otherwise, you're falling into that shoulding, right? You should, you should, you should. And the third way that I think about shining the light is a floodlight. And that's about creating space within your community to shine a floodlight on that stigma of mental illness, to shine a floodlight to create space for the conversation around mental illness, cast away that darkness so that people can live and move freely and get help if needed and feel more confident to go and get help. This is where Do More Ag sits. Do More Ag is a floodlight. We are absolutely a floodlight. We work really, really hard to help communities to shape space for the conversation around mental illness so that more people and more communities become safe and supportive spaces for people who happen to have a mental health illness or an injury or an adversity of any kind. And this is where my presentation ends. Thank you. We are a national level charitable organization, so I have to put the donation button in there simply because it's the strangest part of my job is to ask for help, but I can't do what I do without the support. Thankfully, we do have wonderful industry support, but what I know is that I have farmers lined up to tell me that the work that we do is important and they're there to support us in every way they can. I've put a QR code there to access resources. We build a library of resources right across Canada, so we link you to places like Sask Matters in Saskatchewan, where if a farmer does feel like they could use a little therapy support, but they don't have the money because it's expensive. It's usually around $200 an hour or more. and they don't have the money for that, SaskAg Matters has a pot of funding in place where they can help to connect you to ag-informed therapists and support 4 or 6 sessions with that therapist. And so there are supports like that in place, and there are supports like that similarly in Manitoba, in Alberta, in BC, and all across Canada. And so when I say that we connect, that's absolutely what we try and do, is that we let people know that resources exist and we connect you to any resources that you need. And sometimes you just need to read a blog post so that you feel less alone today. Maybe you just need to see a social media card that reminds you to stop and breathe. Maybe you just need to learn how to do box breathing, and maybe that's all you need today. People don't always need automatically to phone a crisis call line or work with a therapist. Sometimes they're just looking for the tools and the help that they need to just make each day just that little bit better. And that's it.